Hi, welcome to the How to Do a Holy Dialogue section of our Holy Dialogues. I am Pastor Kim Purl, also known as Missouri Pastor, and part of the Holy Dialogue Trinity here. And so our good friend, my good friend Jeremy, introduce yourself.
Hey, thanks, Pastor Kim. I'm Jeremy Emmert. I live in Washington, D.C., and I love being here to talk about this kind of stuff. 7 steps about how to do this, or how we've experienced doing this. And one of the first things we talked about is you have to be ready to listen with curiosity and compassion. Pastor Kim, what does that mean to you?
Well, whenever I know that we're getting ready to do a holy dialogue together, I like to make sure I know what the topic's going to be, and I try my best to get my mind framed around it. And then I really pray for the Spirit to give me sensitive heart and to make sure that I'm coming into the dialogue with complete peace and in a heart full of holy love for the situation that I need to be able to engage with, or the topic I mean. So, so that it really is a very holy moment. How do you approach it, Jeremy? How do you get ready?
I have to say, I just want to say to you, Pastor Kim, like you embody approaching the conversation with compassion to me. You come into these spaces, and you are so sensitive, and I can sense that, and it helps me prepare because it's the disposition we need for these conversations. And I remember, when we practice these holy dialogues, for me, it's like going to the gym, right? It's a deliberate time where I'm practicing something that culture is not necessarily giving me through osmosis. But I come into these spaces, I watch how you're truly curious, you're truly compassionate, you truly want to know. And it makes me never even think there could potentially be a theological difference on something. It's just not something that's the forefront of my mind. That's what for me, curiosity and compassion does, and how these conversations we have prepare me to have other conversations. I know we've also talked about, as one of the principles, how do you, if you have a question you're not concerned, or a question that you're concerned about asking, you feel maybe insecure about asking, or you're not sure how to ask, how do you frame your question so that it is compassionate, or so it is curious and it doesn't offend the person?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's the second step. That's where we're at.
Okay.
We have 7 steps for sharing. So in the second step, what do we most want to know, and how do we ask that question in a compassionate and curious way? I know for myself, I just go into it with a very humble attitude that I don't have the answers, and that I'm in a place of learning. I am the student, and I need to be a person who's opened their heart to what the Holy Spirit would like for me to learn through the discussion. And so I frame my questions that way. Not first I try not to frame it out of my own ground where I stand, but you can't help it because that's where you're at. But to realize that I take the second spot, and that the question is toward seeking to understand the other, that is the one I'm wanting to learn from. So I frame the questions that way. And then I'll often reach out and ask that person if they get the idea, to help me know how to better frame that question and to be humble to receive that. Jeremy, how do you do? How do you do when you try to frame those things?
For me, there's a boldness to these conversations, right? I frame things by being sincere, but being bold. I think being bold shows honor. If I'm transparent and say, hey, I really want to know about, if someone says something, for example, like getting a holy dialogue started, if someone says something that sounds strange to me, or I'm not even in a deliberate space, when I consult God and have a sincere heart to want to understand the situation. You have to have boldness to be humble and approach and say, I want to know more about this. I find that for the most part, that is what cracks that like icy door open, so that dialogue can actually happen.
Excellent. Mhm. So what's the third step, Jeremy, that we do?
So the third step is listen, 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 listen.
That's
Sincerely.
right. Listen, listen, listen.
That's the
All
kid.
ears.
Yeah, take it. How do you do
Yeah.
that?
Well, I find that I would rather sit and listen through a holy dialogue than ask questions. So I'm the one that I feel like asks the least amount of questions because I want to be all ears, and at the same time I'm high on processing very quickly the information, because I'm a person that when I take in such freshness and new things to consider, it takes me a while to process those things, but whenever we're having a dialogue, I've got to get with it. So, but listen in ways, as I've said before, that include leading of the Holy Spirit. And I often pray that it's so easy to follow the Spirit as I'm listening. And what is that speaking into my life by sitting and learning from others? And Jeremy, how does listening affect you?
Um, for me, if listening is a posture, if I'm in the right posture, things that might otherwise offend me, if I'm just going about in my operating out of my pride, or being busy and just moving from here to there, and not being postured correctly, then certain things could offend me. But when you're postured correctly, it's not a stretch to say almost nothing can offend you, because it's a posture that says, I'm here to learn. I'm talking to a reflection of God every time. We're never, when we're talking to another human, we're never talking to anything less than a reflection of God. And if I can have that posture about what is happening, it's the secret sauce to having a holy dialogue.
Yeah, you remember there have been times in our dialogues where we're just very still, because what is being spoken is really pretty profound in itself as a story or an experience by the person that we've invited to share. And that just it's hard to come up with anything to say after something so heavy or so sacred, I guess you could say, a very sacred moment, a very sacred story. And those only come if we can be quiet and open our ears and listen. Yeah. Well,
That's okay. Before you move on to the next step, I gotta
yeah.
say, you just nailed it when you reminded me of how we've sat in like a stunned sacred silence before, when we've had people come on and share with us their hearts.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I'm glad you made me recall that, because that is what it's about. Yeah,
Yeah.
back to the steps.
5 out of 7. After we've shared our thoughts, we wait for responses to what has been said, whether it's us or the other person who just shared, where it's this moment of waiting. How do you sit in that tension? And how do we know when to say what's next when we talk about that moment of the waiting?
Can I take this one first before you
Go
go?
for it. It's you.
I just have to know my personality type, and my personality type is I'm very much an introvert, and I need the ice broken off of any social situation. Really, I always get nervous in the beginning, but when you're listening and when you come with the right attitude, things can slow down so that you don't look like you're just waiting to say something. You're waiting for the person to stop talking so you can say something. You've really taken it in, and if I say anything,
Mhm.
it's more deliberate at that point. because the cadence that, you've come into the situation with curiosity and compassion, you've listened, truly listened, and then if I have something to say, I'm in that calm space where it makes sense, and it brings things to a level where you can have that person to person core dialogue. Your thoughts, Esther Kim?
Well, I know that there have been times whenever I just take a moment and I repeat back very slowly and kind of intentionally, like, did I get this right? So what I'm hearing is, and if it's something like that, if it's a thought, a new thought for me, to repeat that back. So I think in doing that, sometimes you allow the other person to recognize that they have been heard and that you're processing that. And I think that that's another important piece at times when it's appropriate. Other times it's just to sit in awe, and we wonder, how do we go from here? Because the presence of God becomes so heavy and real. And we just sometimes do need to sit in a sacred silence for a moment and just acknowledge pain that has been shared. And I think that that in itself is appropriate response sometimes.
Preaching, Pastor Kim, you're preaching. It's good.
Preaching. Now, the sixth step in the dialogue is to keep it going, asking questions rather than answer them, show compassion and curiosity in everything we say and do. And so how do we keep it going? How do we do that? Jeremy, what's a key for you in knowing how to keep it going at times?
When I think about keeping it going, obviously, it can be several contexts, one being the current dialogue that you're having. But for me, what that step represents, or what that principle means to me, is that when you experience a holy dialogue with someone, when you experience a person who shared their heart without fear, or maybe with fear, but the person, you've not reacted in any way that would, with anything but love, when you've experienced that, it makes you want to replicate it again, because it has a healing effect. For me personally, if I'm too tuned into culture, I don't watch the news. I don't participate in a lot of social media, only because the culture can sound so harsh at times. So we know that it can be harsh sounding out there. When you have a holy dialogue, you want to continue this and bring a level of peace to the interactions you have as a counterforce to kind of what's going on out there. Pastor Kim, I know for you, I mean, given your role as a pastor, keeping this going in a lot of contexts can be interesting for you. Not everyone maybe supports someone like you coming into these spaces. So I know keeping it going for you has very much different stakes than it does for me. For me, it's just, I'm just a regular person wanting to make things well for people. But curious from the perspective where you sit, what this is like for you.
Well, I take a perspective at times of just absorbing tension from the other, if that's needed to be done. And that can even be done in framing the next question. If I sense that there is a tension there, to go ahead and ask in a gracious and loving way about the tension, recognize that it's there, and talk about why that would be there, and how can we work with that. And so I think just being aware at all times of just being very sensitive to each other, and maybe even asking the other person, asking the other person if they have any other ideas along a line of thought.
Step 7, how do you end this on a loving note? What's a good way to process out one of these moments?
I love when we're finished, when we always thank each other for being honest and being in pointing out something that stood out in the whole dialogue that was so helpful. Just kind of bringing all that together, and then ending with blessing. blessing one another. Yeah, we've done any of those things. It just kind of depends on how it ends. And it's always, I appreciate how loving and kind that sense of the Holy Spirit is with us as we meet. And it's something that we have to live into. We have to humble and allow that to be lived into. Now, Jeremy, what stands out to you and how we finish up?
Um, One of my favorite phrases that can not only go at the end of something like this, but can happen during it is borrowed from the 12-step tradition. I see it in a small group all the time, but when someone has shared, and like you said earlier, Pastor Gam, sometimes because you're in stunned silence, because I want to acknowledge that I've heard, I want to acknowledge that I was curious and compassionate. I want to show these principles we've just talked about. Sometimes all I can say is thanks for sharing, because I want them to know, like, I've heard you. I'm not even going to pretend that I can dignify advice, suggestions. I can even suggest that I know what it's like to feel like other people feel. I just want them to know that I am thankful that they've shared, because it's changed me. I'm not going to give advice, but yeah.
And so as we would wrap this piece up, I would also say there is, I don't think there's any perfect holy dialogue. I think that we enter into it with all that we are, in recognizing that we have pieces to work on, and that's why we're there having the dialogue. And it's the best thing when everyone agrees together. But, I've heard of those that haven't gone so well. Not particularly in our group, but there's still that loving graciousness extended in hopes of having more conversations. That's the way I like to leave, knowing that we'll have more conversations. So thanks for stopping in to the 7-step process of how to do a holy dialogue. And I hope that yours are fantastic and that you experience all kinds of things that change your life and also give you a lot of things to think about. God bless.